Hello, students. Romanticism is the next term that we are going to study in our literary theory and criticism paper. We have to see that Romanticism is an intellectual movement which began in, as we have discussed, is a movement that started in 18th century but lasted and can be felt in the modern age too. Romanticism, practiced by romantic writers and the critical theorists who propounded the romanticism with their deeper tendency or their interest in the in the natural or the things that are natural. Just like natural, they see the beauties of the countryside, the individual caliber, capacity, means genius. At the same time, the emotional and imaginative spontaneity, and they valued emotions and feelings as major important factors. They valued, and it's a kind of a characteristic that pose the balanced views and they oppose to the classical norms of reason, balance, order, and artifices. So, Romanticism was a powerful influence on the cultural world of Europe. Several works were produced during this period and they become later on the literary canons. So, what are the socio political context and artistic reasons that caused the Romanticism? It became a socio political, socio cultural movement in the in the so called 18th century and 19th century Europe. There were certain movements or literary or artistic cultural movements that caused the Romanticism, namely the Enlightenment, American and French revolutions, at the same time, industrial development and the urbanization that come up later on. The emphasis on rationalism were aided by socio-political and intellectual background to the Romanticism. These developments in Europe influenced and reflected in the literature of the time. So, these new and revolutionary aesthetic ideas that stress the subjectivity and imagination, artistic genius, themes, and language that are borrowed from common people were brought into the Romanticism. Its historical development as a literary movement can be seen in the fellow romantic movements in Germany, France, and English or English Romanticism. These movements were uh, allied together. They never developed independently, but they developed as a common. Romanticism later on spread to different parts of Europe and America. And given the short outline of how Romanticism began and developed in the coming era. So we have the German Romanticism, and this German Romanticism is found its true and comprehensive expression in literary theory and criticism. It was the critics and theorists who laid the foundation for the Romanticism. So it recognized, it get recognized and developed in uh, Germany because it flourished within and through criticism. It was organized. It's a self-conscious and argumentative school of thought. So, driving intellectual force behind this kind of thinking was Immanuel Kant. Kant expressed his views on beauty, art, and imagination and in his critical philosophy. His views provided a theoretical base to German critics and influenced other European critics as well. So it is therefore helpful to know his views related to art and poetry in nutshell. Kant proposed that the mind can construct its own world, and such a construction would obviously be subjective. Applied to poetry and other forms of literature, this was philosophical sanction of the subjectivity of the poet's mind that Romanticism or Romantics fully utilized. He made distinction between art and craft. He privileged Immanuel Kant. He gave more privileged position to art over craft because he argued that art is free of artificial constraints and that fine art arouses a kind of feeling of spiritual pleasure. Craft, on the other hand, is mercenary and mechanical. It gives concrete shape to the object in mind, but cannot give a feeling of true spiritual pleasure. He thought genius to be a natural disposition, something to be earned through hard work and reason. It cannot be taught, it cannot be learned. It is natural. It means that there can be no rules for the creation of art. Art follows its own rules. A work of art shows the rules of its creation. According to Kant, imagination is an animating principle of the mind. It gives concrete form to an aesthetic idea. It creates another nature and world that of the nature provides to it. Immanuel Kant, he rates poetry as one of the finest form of art because it offers a full scope to the imagination and expresses that is inexpressible. Means its visionary concept of the poet that he highlights. It's a faculty of to see beyond what other common human being cannot see. So the poet is a visionary one, and this is what Kant believed on. It is clear that Kant disagreed with many of the classical ideas and proposed the free art concept in the construction of any creative work. He influenced two generations of notable critics in Germany. And the first generation, as we have seen, the Kant's ideas were directly seen in their ideas of beauty, art, and sublimity. We have Friedrich von Schiller was a dramatist, a poet, and a critic. He elaborated Kant's ideas, art and aesthetics. He looked upon art as a solution to many of the world problems. The writer's role, according to him, was to recreate this ideal world that is available and made available through the poetic creation, through the imagination. So, it is a very uh, thought provoking concept of Friedrich von Schiller that we see. August Schlegel is another German theorist of the Romantic generation. He was also a philologist. His association and devotion to Romanticism started with his translation of William Shakespeare's in German language. He delivered, more specifically, the art and visionary, imaginative creation of Shakespeare's dramatic art, which became very famous as we have seen. So, William Hazlitt and William Wordsworth praised Schlegel's views. Coleridge was very much influenced by August Schlegel's lecture and especially his views on Shakespeare's plays. Schlegel, who uphold the notion of the beauty for beauty's sake and union of poetry and life and the absolute freedom of the artist to express these experiences. We have this another critic, and this type of concept that we see here is Friedrich Schelling. In the system of ट्रान्सेंडेंटल आयडियालिझम ह्या पुस्तकामध्ये याचे रोमॅन्टिसिझमचे विचार आपल्याला पाहायला मिळतात. त्यांनी आयडिया ऑफ कॉन्शियसनेस ही या संदर्भात एक नव्याने रिइंटरप्रिटेशन प्रपोज केलं. ॲट द सेम टाईम हे बाहेरील जग आहे त्याचा कॉन्शियसनेसमध्ये किंवा सेल्फ कॉन्शियसमध्ये कसं रिफ्लेक्शन होत असतं अशा पद्धतीचे फ्रेडरिक शेलिंग यांची ही आयडिया जी आहे ती कॉन्शियसनेसची आयडिया त्यांनी मांडली. आणि म्हणून त्यामुळे जे काही कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन्स आहेत, इफेक्टिव्ह इंटरॅक्शन्स आहेत, सब्जेक्ट आणि ऑब्जेक्ट, माइंड अँड नेचर जे बाहेरील आहेत ते आतमध्ये मना कसं येतं, कसं रिफ्लेक्ट होतं या संदर्भात चर्चा आपल्याला केलेली पाहायला मिळते. ही बिलीव्ड दॅट ह्युमन माइंड अचीव्ज इट्स हायेस्ट सेल्फ कॉन्शियसनेस इन आर्ट. आणि म्हणून आर्ट हे एक बेस्ट पॉसिबल रिसोर्स आहे का ज्या माध्यमातून जे कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन्स आहेत ते कॉन्ट्राडिक्शन्स आपल्याला पाहायला मिळतात. शेलिंग्स जी थेअरी जी होती ती ग्रेटली इन्फ्लुएन्स्ड मेनी इंटेलेक्च्युअल्स अक्रॉस युरोप. So, who borrowed Schelling's ideas to explain his theory of poetic creation. The principle of interaction between mind and nature helped Coleridge to form his theory on poetic imagination. The second generation of the German Romanticism consists of Clemens Brennan-Tonneau, Achim Arin, Ludwig Ullhardt, and Joseph Goeritz. This generation did not formulate views on Romanticism independently and largely followed the lead of the first generation theorists. So, we have seen this German Romanticism reflected in the literature. See, so like this, we have this various of authors or the theorists who propounded their views on the beauty, art, nature of poetic creation, the individual talent, caliber, or consciousness or development of the consciousness, as well as to interact between the what is inside and what is outside, means internal world and external world. And why this literature is such a wonderful that we can find the answers to the solutions to the world problems, and these theories clearly discusses about the nature and function of literature, or the nature and function of poetry through romantic perspective. So this was what the German Romanticism that we see here. We have the next movement that was like German Romanticism was also a commonly based or shared principles that we have seen. We have its own distinctive nature and mode of expression. If German Romanticism is philosophical, French counterpart or French Romanticists were artistic and social. French Romanticism or Romantic writers, artists largely restricted their ideas to the domain of art. They never applied it to religion and to the politics because Germans did it. The French Romanticism was assertive, aggressive, because it had to react to the stronghold of 18th century neoclassicism. So we have the saint or the renowned social thinker Rousseau, who provided the philosophical and intellectual base to the romant to the French Romanticism, and that was what we have seen. The Enlightenment principle was at the base of Rousseau's Romanticism. These three uh, trending romantic features that are developed by Rousseau. See, Rousseau historically he belonged to the Enlightenment movement, but he rejected the principles of it. He argued that reason deprives man of sympathy for fellow feeling. So he is against this reason, making him self-centered and selfish. Man's worth doesn't depend on intelligence but on his moral nature. Moral nature consists of feeling. Feeling is the only common thing that all men possesses. Therefore, it can create equality and justice in human beings. Rousseau gave the call, this very famous call, return to nature or back to nature. This idea of nature is based on freedom from all methods of learning and education. It is a free communion with nature. It cultivates the feeling necessary to deal fairly and humanly with others. Thus, man in natural environment becomes truly liberal and moral. These ideas greatly influenced the French and other Romantics. We find the echoes of the Rousseau's ideas in the theoretical formulations of critics, themes of creative writers. Rousseau provided artists and critics of the spirit with a very wide range of ideas that stood traditional. These ideas included distrust in research, in reason. So, it's such for innocence and uncorrupt world. The urge for the liberation and nature as source of knowledge and delight was at the base of this. And that we see are reflected in the literature. See, so these what so we can find here are the tenets of French Romanticism. Madame de Stael was a precursor of the French Romanticism. She wrote her first piece of criticism and treated literature as a product of social history and environment. Her bold personality and extraordinary talent made her the source for the French Romanticism. She adopted progressive view, she advocated justice, she liberated she liberated her ideas and views, and that reflected in the freedom of writers and women also. Francois Chateaubriand is another French romanticist. He wrote a defense like Christian faith, and that significant contribution made to romanticism. He was an impassioned love for Christianity, eloquently presented emotional and imaginative appeal of religion. He was a religious minded person. His autobiographical features are reflected in his work. He was hypersensitive to this power of imagination, to the beauty of nature, and his love. Victor Hugo is a central figure of this romantic movement, novelist, poet, and dramatist of great eminence and instrumental in giving French poetry a romantic orientation. He introduced new subjects and changed diction and versification. Thus, we have the freedom to French poetry. The poet, he made a great impact with his plays and novels. In plays, he violated the unities and other neoclassical norms. In his two novels, brings us the testimony of his French romantic features. So, like this, we have studied the two types of Romanticism, German and followed by French Romanticism. Now we have to turn to see the English Romanticism, and we will go through the features of English Romanticism. Thank you.